দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ RTV নিয়মিত আলোচনা অনুষ্ঠান ফোর্থরাইটে। এই অনুষ্ঠানে আমরা কথা বলি বিভিন্ন সেক্টরের বিশেষজ্ঞদের সাথে যারা বাংলাদেশ নিয়ে ভবিষ্যৎ পরিকল্পনা ও তাদের অভিজ্ঞতা নিয়ে আলোচনা করেন। করোনা মহামারীতে মানুষের জীবন ও জীবিকা আজ ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত। এরই মধ্যে অন্যরকম জটিলতার মুখে রয়েছে বাংলাদেশের নিম্ন ও নিম্ন মধ্যবিত্ত শ্রেণীর শ্রমিকেরা। করোনায় শ্রমিকদের চাকরির চ্যালেঞ্জ, সমতা এবং শ্রমিক মালিকের সম্পর্ক নিয়ে কথা বলবো আজকের ফোর্থরাইটে। আপনাদের সঙ্গে আছে আমি আশিক রহমান। আজকের বিষয় আনএমপ্লয়মেন্ট চ্যালেঞ্জেস ডিউরিং কোভিড-19। আর এই বিষয়ে আলোচনার জন্য আজ আমাদের সঙ্গে যুক্ত হয়েছেন জাতিসংঘের শ্রম বিষয়ক সংস্থা ইন্টারন্যাশনাল লেবার অর্গানাইজেশন ILO এর বাংলাদেশ প্রতিনিধি মিস্টার টুমো পটিয়ানিন এবং বাংলাদেশের তৈরি পোশাক শিল্প রপ্তানিকারকদের সংগঠন BGME এর প্রেসিডেন্ট ডক্টর রুবানা হক। Very welcome Mr. Tumo and Rubana Haq at Fortnight. Firstly, I would like to start with Mr. Tumo. You are working as country representative of ILO in Bangladesh. Would you please share your experience with us so far?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And I think needless to say that the current circumstances of work are very different than what they have been a couple of years ago when I arrived. But some of the key principles and basics of Bangladesh continue to be there. And one of them, of course, is a young, capable and willing labor force and a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, which is on which very much there is a testament by the success story of the garment industry and also other export industries. So those have been remarkable in terms of looking at Bangladesh going forward. Of course, now we are facing a little bit of a different scenario, and I think we will talk about that more today. But what I can say is that I've seen in my almost 5 years in Bangladesh quite a lot of positive changes in relation to the work and the world of work, and I can mention just few. One of them is working conditions and attention to safety at work has tremendously changed in these 5 years. And not only in the garment sector and some of the other sectors, but also generally by the government, by the workers and by the employers. There's an increasing recognition that one must invest in better working conditions and also increasingly in skilling of workers. You know that we talk a lot about future of work, and before COVID, that was one of the topics that was very much discussed. It was the topic, how do you make economic development happen with the new changes in technology, and how do you get the best out of the future of work? And I think that's very much still a positive trajectory going forwards. So these are a couple of the things that I've been witness to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tumo. Dr. Rubana Haq, it is said that RMG sector was hit the hardest in the COVID-19 pandemic. To fight back, what kind of measures are needed to overcome this crisis?
The sector was hardest hit. You're absolutely right. During COVID is the support that we already have received from the government. Honorable Prime Minister was very, very generous, and we were given a stimulus package with a low interest loan. So that saved us because at least we could pay our workers their salaries. So that was a huge help. But going forward, there are lots of things that we still need to make sure that the sector receives. For instance, we woke up to a completely uncertain situation where buyers had just cancelled orders, evoking force majeure clauses. So it was a shock for us. So, payment contracts must be guaranteed by at least a credit risk system. So there has to be a credit guarantee for all the outstanding payments. This is something we have to look at. We have to look at the contracts. How are we doing these contracts with our customers, which ultimately leave us very, very vulnerable. Also, there is insufficient mechanism in exit policy. And we don't have any exit policy. So even small and medium factories which struggle cannot actually go out of business when they want to because there are no legal protections, literally. We need, of course, a lot of FDIs, foreign direct investment in terms of 100% or joint venture in areas where we lag behind is needed. The country also needs to engage in economic diplomacy and do free trade agreements. And we think that, above all, access to finance for the manufacturers is a must. So these are the measures that we can actually adopt in order to survive and sustain the industry.
Mr. Tumo, worldwide, what are the primary areas of activities of ILO?
In relation to the COVID-19 in particular, I think the number one task that we took upon ourselves together with the partners was really to look into how the safe places can be more safe. Safe from COVID-19, but also generally in terms of the returning to work and promote it. The second most important thing has been that the return to work has also have the sense of justness and fairness. So if there were any kind of issues around, let's say, retrenchments or non-renewal of contracts or whatever those might be, there should be a process where those can be looked into, and there is a fair chance to look into how that justness exists. And lastly, and quite importantly too, that there indeed is a new way of protecting jobs and developing employment protection and social protection systems going forwards. And this is in relation to things like cash transfers, but also developing new mechanisms for the future, so that if there were to be similar situations, the economy and the employers and workers together would be better equipped to absorb these kind of shocks. So these are the three main things.
Dr. Natok, garments account for over 85% of Bangladesh's export earnings. And overall perspective of the economy, what have we gained and lost? What do you mean by non-traditional business?
There is nothing that we gained from COVID.
There is nothing.
Except for a lot of uncertainty. There are lessons which were learned, that we are very, very vulnerable in the hands of Western buyers, and that very often we are not able to even negotiate well with them, because we are literally at the mercy of them. So these things have to change. So COVID, for the first time, I think from Bangladesh, we turned around and we raised our concern and our voice, and we addressed the buyers and said that you cannot do this to us.
Exactly.
Because there are so many workers in this sector, 4.1 million, that's not a joke. So for that, we did raise a lot of concern and awareness, and luckily international support came, so we were fine. We were at least steady, and especially because of the incentive package, we didn't have to think about securing the salaries of our workers. We got it from the government, we took it as a loan, and we paid them. So we could concentrate on actually negotiating and bargaining with the buyers. So what it has taught us is that we should have had an unemployment fund scheme.
Well, Mr. Tumo, expertise comments on Bangladesh as Asian tycoon. As a specialist, how much optimistic you are on Bangladesh progress, and how does COVID affect?
Well, taking from what I said at the very early stages, I am naturally quite optimistic about the trajectory of Bangladesh, because it does have quite a lot of the qualities that are required for inclusive and forward-looking economic growth. But that doesn't come naturally. It has to be something that is invested in. And particularly, I think what there is a need to invest in is really technical training and skilling, looking at what are those future drivers for economic development and investing in that now. And secondly, I think having a joint vision, a vision that the policymakers, the private sector and the employers, but also the workers and the civil society shares in terms of employment, in terms of economic growth, and in terms of social protection. I think going forward, this becomes extremely important as the country is building up to a LCD status and becoming more and more integrated in the regional and global economy. And one last thing I want to mention in particular, we have to look collectively how young people, young girls and boys can increasingly be able to take advantage of that growth. And how can that happen in a more, let's say, equal and inclusive manner? So those are a couple of the things going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Patiani. Dr. Natok, as president of BGMA, you predicted on garment workers' job loss due to coronavirus fallout. What is the current situation of RMG sector?
Job loss just didn't happen in Bangladesh. It happened worldwide. Everywhere people were furloughed. For instance, Vietnam actually furloughed 50,000 workers without any pay. India went into suspension of labor law completely for 3 years in many provinces. Bangladesh did nothing of that. Rather, Bangladesh paid 65% for the workers who didn't work in April for 25 days. So we were the one who basically even paid our workers for even not joining. Yes, we predicted job loss to a substantial degree, but we did it when we didn't receive the stimulus package. Right after the stimulus package came through, we continued as much as we could. And you know what? With every worker's job gone, it also weakens the entrepreneur. So nobody wants to let go of the workers, because with the workers not being in the job also means the death of the business.
Mr. Tumo, do you think that the factories are following ILO's recommendations for protecting workers, especially the health and safety use?
What was done at the very instant when the we started to understand better what the COVID meant in terms of work safety. It was ILO who provided some initial guidance, but there's also quite a lot of global guidance. And that global guidance and ILO guidance has been blended into government, Ministry of Labor and Department of Inspection guidelines on safety and health. So I think, generally speaking, the government and the industries took a very speedy steps in terms of establishing these kind of processes. Now, what then matters is how well these are actually applied at the enterprise level.
Well, Mr. Tumo and Rubana Haq, we'll talk more after a short break. দর্শক দেখছেন RTV নিয়মিত আলোচনা অনুষ্ঠান ফোর্থরাইট। এই পর্যায়ে নিচ্ছি বিরতি, ফিরছি একটু পরে। সে পর্যন্ত আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন। দর্শক, আবারও আমন্ত্রণ ফোর্থরাইট অনুষ্ঠানে। আজকে কথা বলছিলাম করোনায় শ্রমিকদের চাকরির চ্যালেঞ্জ, সমতা এবং শ্রমিক মালিকের সম্পর্ক নিয়ে। ওয়েলকাম এগেইন বোথ অফ ইউ অ্যাট ফোর্থরাইট। ডক্টর রুবানা হক, in your view, how does the government help RMJ sector to create more jobs and retain the existing employment through budgetary measures?
We've made a host of recommendations to the government, partly of which were actually adopted in the budget. For instance, we did say that Bangladesh, all our supply is based mostly on cotton-based product. But worldwide, the man-made fiber consumption is going up. So we did request the government to make sure that the man-made fiber-based backward linkage is adequately supported. So government has indicated in the budget that yes, MMF-based textile will be encouraged. Also, at the same time, we needed the incentive package came through a budgetary allocation, the first 5,000 crore. So that was also done directly by the government. Going forward, it's just not about budgetary measures, but also about an overall change in perspective. For instance, we need a little bit of banking support in terms of all the back-to-back liabilities that we have incurred. So orders have been cancelled, and then a couple of them 90% have been restored, but the payment terms are all deferred. So instead of sticking to the original payment terms, many of the buyers are now paying us after 120 days, 180 days. So we need some kind of a support from the government so that our back-to-back financing is secure. There are many buyers who have actually gone bankrupt. So for that, we need a shadow protection at this end. So the government needs to be aware of this so that, our individual factory limits are not impacted, so that we can still continue our business. Because a buyer who's actually dying in the US or in EU, his or her insolvency should not be impacting us, because that would mean that our workforce gets impacted. So we need a couple of shadow protections, and of course, like I said, our exports to non-traditional markets need to be a little more incentivized, so that we can diversify our products to other markets. So diversification of products, diversification of markets, and of course, some fiscal measures which will help us through this.
What are the challenges for diversification?
Diversification needs to happen in many segments. So it can be a diversification of product, it can be a diversification of market, it can be diversification of skill. So all three can happen at the same time. So if we talk about diversification of product, we need to do higher value added product now. We need to, our over concentration on 5 basic products cannot sustain this industry. So we need to look for better product with better prices. But you know what? We're always used to 50,000 pieces, 500,000 pieces in one long run of production, but that may not happen anymore. So we must get used to smaller runs. So 2,000 pieces, 5,000 pieces, but at a better price. So we need to change our industry structure so that we can do more of a better value-added product. Right. At the same time, diversification of the industry, we would rather say, many things are connected to our industry. For instance, waste, recycling. So even recycling can become a huge industry to diversify into for the industry. For instance, spare parts, chemicals, they can all become related supplementary businesses for us to diversify into. So these are areas we should be thinking of very carefully. And we have recently suggested export diversification scheme to be headed by BIDA, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority. And we have said that, under BIDA, there can be a council, an export diversification council, so that we can all align with the multinational enterprises and go forward and plan the next at least 20 years for Bangladesh.
Thanks, Urban Haq, for your nice clarification. Mr. Tumo, in your view, what challenges for the factory owners and workers for resume production?
So I think Rubana was talking very much about the new sort of needs for the industry to grow, right?
Exactly.
And I think in many ways that continues with the need to also invest in increasingly skilled labor force, committed labor force, and good relations and joint vision as between the workers and the employers, because in that way one is able to go forward in a joint step. So having good what we call industrial relations and social dialogue at the workplace is extremely important. But having also new ways of working together. And for example, when we have been discussing about the diversification of economy, one element that is often not as much looked into as perhaps should be is the investments in the small and medium enterprises and oiling and facilitating that type of forward and backward linkages in terms of getting to that diversification, right? And I think there very much the role will be with skilled workers and skilled managers, those who are able to connect to markets, those who are able to connect to what the future of production looks like, and those who are also able to manage the workers, the skilled workers going forward. So those are a couple of ideas that come to fore.
Well, thank you. Well, Dr. Rubana Haq, regarding trade development issues, in your opinion, what are the main challenges for Bangladesh in the near future?
I think economic diplomacy has to be strengthened in order to do more trade development. I think interministerial coordination needs to be improved. I think also in most of the policy decisions, an insertion of private sector is imperative because going forward, we are also graduating from the LDC status. So a lot of things need to be changed because the rules of origin need to be changed. But these are issues that directly impact the industry. So a public-private dialogue must be strengthened at this point. So in brief, once again, interministerial coordination, public and private dialogue, of course, needs to be much more strong so that we can also give appropriate policy suggestions to the government.
Well, we are almost end of this program. Any final thought both of you want to share with our viewers? Starting from Dr. Rubana Haq.
One thing that we would need media support on would be changing the narrative of the industry. we need to all work together so that the image of the industry is upheld. Because without that, we actually cannot be the supplier that we want to be. We have remediated our factories. We have the maximum number of green factories in the world, yet we don't get the green price. It's just because, our image, our reputation is never upheld in the international segment. So we need domestic support also from all of you. That's one. The definition of sustainability needs to change now, because it cannot just be about environment. It has to be about business environment also, because we can never be sustainable with our businesses if the contracts don't change, if the relationship with the buyer and the supplier don't change. So that has to be solidified. Also, at the same time, SDG alignment is required in the industry, which already is happening. But if we can somehow or the other, and we have started a new project of identifying the SDG goals with the industry. If that happens, Bangladesh gets automatically a boost in terms of the SDG alignment, in terms of the industry, of course. And last but not the least, education for our workers. I think that is key. For many of our workers, we are now sending them to Asian University for Women, and they are now graduating. The first batch has graduated. So I think we have set the path for our workers to also be integrated into our society. I think time for disparity to end should begin. We must begin somewhere. So I look forward to a more inclusive working place, along with an inclusive economy, which will leave no one behind.
Thank you. And Mr. Tumo, your conclusion remarks.
Thank you. And I do believe that quite a lot has been done in Bangladesh in relation to decent work, creating values around decent work, safety and health, and also sustainability, particularly in the front-running industries, the export industries. I think it's important to continue to build on these values. I think it's important to increasingly share these values also with the domestic industries and with SMEs, because through that exercise of having emphasis on sustainable, decent workplaces and betterment of the environment for businesses, one is able to go a long way to reaching those goals, those LCD graduation goals that Bangladesh has set.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tumo and Dr. Rubana Haq, for being with us and sharing your very important findings. We hope our viewers will get positive messages from your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
দর্শক, বিশ্বে মানব সভ্যতা গড়ে উঠেছে মানুষের শ্রমের বিনিময়ে। এক্ষেত্রে এক পক্ষের দিক নির্দেশনায় অপর পক্ষের কায়িক শ্রমে গড়ে উঠে শিল্প, উৎপাদিত হয় নানা সামগ্রী। শ্রমিক ছাড়া উৎপাদন হতে পারে না, আবার শ্রমিকের আয় রোজগারেরও উৎস তাদের এই শ্রম। কিন্তু করোনা পরিস্থিতিতে আজ এই শ্রমিকেরাই সবচেয়ে বেশি বিপদগ্রস্ত। কোভিড-19 এমন একটি দীর্ঘমেয়াদী সংকটের ইঙ্গিত দিচ্ছে যেখানে কারো একার পক্ষে সামাল দেওয়া কঠিন। ফলে একে অপরের প্রতি নির্ভরশীলতা ভবিষ্যতে আরও বৃদ্ধি পাবে বলে মনে করছেন বিশ্লেষকেরা। তবে পারস্পরিক এই নির্ভরশীলতার আদলে বিশ্বায়নের ইতিবাচক পরিবর্তন ঘটুক, সেই প্রত্যাশায় শেষ করছি আজকের অনুষ্ঠান। এতক্ষণ সঙ্গে থাকার জন্য ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে।
For more updates, subscribe and press the bell icon on YouTube app and never miss another update.